The room was cold, but the tension made it suffocating. Inside the polished, high-ceiling chamber of the ECOWAS Defense Summit in Accra, Ghana, the world's oldest game of power was being played behind closed doors. The air conditioning whispered softly. A futile effort against the heat building at the center of the room, heat that had nothing to do with temperature. 23 African defense ministers sat in tight formation, flanked by 4 European observers, 2 stone-faced UN representatives, and 3 American officials dressed in suits that screamed quiet authority. At the head of the table, a man adjusted his decorated uniform, General Michael Langley, commander of the United States Africa Command. He wasn't just here to participate. He was here to dominate. 3 seats down, his target sat motionless. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the 37-year-old president of Burkina Faso. Young, unshaken, unreadable, his back straight, fingers calmly interlocked on the mahogany table. In Washington's latest briefings, he wasn't listed as a participant. He was described as a threat. Langley had flown in from D.C. for this very moment. Just 2 weeks earlier, he stood before the Senate Armed Services Committee and said it plainly. Captain Traoré represents a direct threat to regional stability and American interests in the Sahel. The committee nodded. The cameras rolled. The script was written. Now came the performance. Langley cleared his throat and stood. His voice was sharp, composed, every word carefully engineered to land like a hammer. Captain Traoré, he began, there are grave concerns about your recent choices. Your alignment with hostile foreign actors, Russia, China, Iran. These are not partnerships. They are betrayals. Betrayals of your people, of your neighbors, of the peace we've all fought to protect. The room stilled. No one spoke. No one blinked. But Langley wasn't finished. We've been monitoring your communications with Moscow, your secret mining contracts with Beijing, your weapons purchases from Tehran. And let me be clear, if Burkina Faso continues down this reckless path, the international community will have no choice but to consider sanctions, isolation, and, if necessary, intervention. He let the word intervention hang in the air like smoke from a pistol. Across the table, the French observer nodded. The British rep scribbled something into a leather notebook. The UN officials remained perfectly still, neutral, only in expression. All eyes returned to Traoré. They expected him to flinch, to speak, to react. A scowl, a rebuttal, a raised voice, something. But the captain didn't move. He didn't blink. The silence wasn't just unsettling, it was defiant. Langley had brought a warning, a threat dressed in diplomacy. But what no one realized, what no one was prepared for, was that the youngest head of state in Africa had come armed too. Not with rage, not with panic, but with something far more dangerous. Silence and a plan. General Langley sat back in his chair, arms folded, confident. He had delivered the blow, now came the collapse. He expected Captain Ibrahim Traoré to push back, maybe with fire, maybe with fear, maybe, if they were lucky, with both. That's how this usually went. The accused defends, the powerful reassert. The balance is restored. But nothing happened. Not a word. Not a breath. Just stillness. Traoré remained seated, eyes locked on Langley, his posture unchanged, his face unreadable, no tremble in his hands. No twitch in his lips. Just stillness. 1 minute passed, and that's when it started the discomfort. The Nigerian defense minister shifted in his seat. The Ghanaian delegate adjusted his collar. The French observer glanced up from his notes. Something was off. Langley could feel it too, though he tried to mask it. 2 minutes. Traoré still hadn't blinked. The silence, once assumed to be hesitation, no felt like strategy. He wasn't frozen. He was calculating. It was the kind of silence that didn't ask permission, it claimed space. 3 minutes. A bead of sweat formed at Langley's temple. He reached for his water, but his fingers grazed the glass and stopped. He didn't want to show nerves. Not here. Not now. But Traoré had done something no one in that room expected. He flipped the dynamic without saying a single word. Langley's voice, backed by the entire weight of American diplomacy, had landed with force. But now, it was Traoré's silence that was echoing. Loud, powerful, humbling. 4 minutes. A whisper rippled through the back of the room, someone asking, "Is he okay?" Another replied, "He's more than okay." He's waiting, but waiting for what? Langley glanced down at his notes. Then, at the screen behind him, it still displayed the ECOWAS logo, innocuous, dull, forgettable. Then it happened. Exactly at the 5-minute mark. Traoré moved. Slowly. Deliberately. He reached beneath the table and pulled out a slim black tablet. He tapped it twice. The main monitor flickered. The ECOWAS logo disappeared. In its place, a satellite image appeared, crisp, high resolution, undeniable. It showed a drone installation located in northern Burkina Faso. Unmarked personnel. American equipment. No flags. No authorization. Gasps rippled across the room like wind through dry leaves. Langley's jaw clenched. Traoré stood. Not rushed. Not theatrical. Just intentional. And when he spoke, his voice was calm. Too calm. "General Langley," he said. I remained silent for a reason. The room froze. When Africa speaks too quickly, we're accused of emotion. When we raise our voices, we're called unstable. When we defend our dignity, we're branded dangerous. He gestured toward the monitor. So today I speak with evidence. Another image appeared. A classified document, marked with an American mining company's seal. Burkina Faso, Resource Extraction Agreement, Unauthorized Operations. 2017. 2024. Traoré's voice sharpened. For 7 years. Uranium, lithium, and gold have been extracted from our land. Total value, over $2 billion. Amount paid to my country's treasury, 0. The room went silent again. But this time, not from confusion. This was impact. Langley leaned forward, lips parting to speak. But nothing came out. Traoré had waited 5 minutes. Not in fear, not in surrender, but in preparation. And now, the narrative had changed. He wasn't the one on trial anymore. Langley was. Traoré's voice didn't rise, but its weight was undeniable. The numbers don't lie, he said, pointing to the data on screen. Billions taken. Nothing returned. And yet, I'm the one called a threat. Langley shifted in his seat. The others noticed. Before anyone could speak, Traoré continued, this time tapping to a new slide. audio waveforms, transcripts, time-stamped conversations. These are recordings of private meetings between American military contractors and what they believed were corrupt Burkinabe officials. In truth, those officials were undercover agents from our own intelligence service. He paused. We documented every word. Gasps again. This time sharper. Audible. He tapped again. A flurry of damning evidence followed. Bank transfers to foreign accounts. Weapons, shipments traced to third-party vendors. Communications between American operatives discussing how to frame Burkina Faso as unstable. Langley's face had hardened. Gone was the man in control. In his place sat a figure, gripped by the slow unraveling of a carefully scripted narrative. You accuse me of dangerous alliances, Traoré said. But I ask you, what's more dangerous? A sovereign nation, choosing its own partners, or a superpower, stealing in silence while preaching about democracy? The room was frozen. No one dared speak. Eyes flicked between Traoré, the screen, and Langley searching for someone to reclaim control of the room. But control was no longer an American export. The Senegalese defense minister broke the silence. President Traoré, he said, carefully, are you saying that foreign forces have been operating inside your borders without consent? Traoré nodded once. Not just operating, extracting, building, spying, all while accusing my predecessor of being too weak to control his own territory. Langley finally spoke, but his voice had lost its edge. These are fabrications, he said. Conspiracy theories, designed to justify your shift toward adversarial regimes. Traoré smiled small, sharp. Then I invite you to disprove them. I welcome international verification. Investigate every image, every document, every wire transfer. He scanned the room slowly, but ask yourself, if this is fiction, why haven't you already denied it? Why threaten sanctions, but not challenge the facts? That question hit like thunder. The Ghanaian representative leaned forward, fingers laced. General Langley, will the United States provide a direct rebuttal to these materials? Langley hesitated. We will not legitimize this kind of theater. That word theater landed wrong. The Tanzanian minister stood, old but proud, voice heavy with history. General, what's theatrical about a nation asking to be paid fairly for its own resources? Another voice joined Rwanda. President Traoré, can you confirm the source of your intelligence? Every detail was obtained through lawful means, Traoré replied, and every claim can be independently verified. He turned to Langley one last time. This is not Africa versus America. This is respect versus exploitation, partnership versus control. And in that moment, everyone in the room knew this was no longer a confrontation. It was a reckoning. The formal session was supposed to end quietly with a closing remark from the Ghanaian host and a polite exit. But nothing about this summit was following protocol anymore. Word had already spread. Delegates texted aides. Clips were being edited in real time, outside the chamber. Dozens of media crews and international observers waited, unsure why the doors had remained shut long past the scheduled end. Then the unexpected happened. The Ghanaian president stepped forward, microphone in hand. In light of the gravity of today's discussion, he said, I believe it is appropriate we hear directly from the man whose evidence has challenged all assumptions. He turned. President Ibrahim Traoré, the floor is yours. A beat of silence passed before Traoré rose from his seat. He didn't carry notes. He didn't need them. He walked to the podium with quiet steadiness. nodding once to the technicians. As he stood there, the doors opened, and the observers were finally let in. Reporters, students, military attaches, everyone who had heard whispers and wanted truth. The room filled. The cameras turned on. Traoré looked over the audience. My fellow Africans. He began. Voice steady. I did not come here to provoke. I came to remind us of something we've forgotten. His tone deepened. Africa is not a chessboard. We are not pawns. We are players. And it's time we started acting like it. The words struck the room like flint on stone. For 60 years, we've been told development means dependency. That aid is generosity. That partnership is a favor. He paused. We've been told our resources belong to those who can extract them fastest. That our young people should be thankful for jobs that pay a fraction of what they're worth, while our minerals, oil, and land enrich others. Heads began to nod. Delegates leaned in. The energy in the room was no longer passive. It was charging. But I say this, we have a choice. His voice rose not in anger, but in clarity. We can continue to accept deals made in boardrooms we'll never enter. Accept debt we didn't create. Accept soldiers who arrive without asking. He scanned the crowd, meeting eyes as if daring each person to challenge him. Or we can choose dignity. We can choose sovereignty. We can choose to be partners, not subjects. The applause started small, then grew, then thundered. But Traoré wasn't finished. I am not here to condemn our traditional allies. I am here to say respect must be mutual, benefit must be shared, and transparency must be non-negotiable. He pointed toward the cameras. To the world watching, hear me clearly. We are not begging for respect. We are demanding it. We are not seeking permission to be sovereign. We already are. The ovation that followed didn't last seconds. It lasted minutes. And in that moment, everyone in the room understood. This wasn't just a speech. It was a signal. Africa had found its voice, and it would not be silenced again. By the time Ibrahim Traoré stepped down from the podium, something irreversible had already begun. Outside the summit walls, a sea of journalists scrambled for footage. Some hadn't even seen the speech they were watching on phones. Reposted in real time. Translated by viewers. Uploaded by anonymous hands. By the time Traoré took his seat again, number, Africa demands. Respect was trending in 5 countries. Inside the room, no one moved. Not out of formality, but because they were stunned. Delegates who had entered the summit under pressure, unsure, cautious, now looked energized, changed. The applause may have ended, but its echo was political. The Ghanaian moderator leaned forward. Hesitant. That concludes. Our A voice cut him off. Mr. President, said the Nigerian defense minister, standing. The documents you've presented, if they're accurate, they represent a betrayal, not just of Burkina Faso, but of all of us. Traoré didn't gloat. He didn't posture. He simply replied, I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to investigate. Verify everything. Demand the same transparency from all partners that you would demand from any African government. Murmurs filled the room again. Then the Zambian representative raised her hand. And what about the criticisms of your leadership style? The military origins of your government? The temperature shifted. Traoré posed, then answered, I won't pretend military leadership is ideal. He said, but I ask you this. Is it more authoritarian to take power to protect your people's resources, or to allow those resources to be stolen quietly, while pretending democracy exists? The room went still. Not defensive, reflective. Langley, sitting rigid, interjected. Ladies and gentlemen, you are being manipulated. This is propaganda, dressed as principle. But his voice didn't carry the same weight anymore. The Kenyan minister turned to him sharply. With respect, General, President Traoré has shown documents. You have shown accusations. Which one should we believe? Langley's mouth opened, then closed. It was too late. The narrative had shifted. What began as an American strategy to isolate Traoré had become a referendum on the very system many African nations had silently endured for decades. The formal session ended, but no one left. They surrounded Traoré ministers, aides, observer, asking questions, requesting documents, exchanging contacts. His chair became a command center. But the true storm came hours later. In Nairobi, university students organized midnight watch parties. In Dakar, protesters held signs quoting Traoré word for word. In Lagos, DJs played the speech between sets, not a remix. The actual speech. By morning, major radio stations across the continent were looping Traoré's closing line, "We are not seeking permission to be sovereign. We already are." And just like that, what was meant to be a routine summit became a spark. A spark that lit conversations in parliaments, classrooms, street corners. The room had clapped, but Africa had roared. It didn't take days. It took hours. By dawn, government buildings across West Africa were buzzing not with routine briefings, but with emergency meetings. In Mali, the president ordered an immediate audit of all foreign military agreements. No more blind signatures. He said, "I want every clause, every base, every backdoor." In Niger, ministers emerged from a closed-door session and announced a full renegotiation of uranium contracts that had gone unquestioned for decades. In Chad, a press release stated that the government would begin exploring new partnerships and partners who don't demand silence in exchange for support. One by one, dominoes fell. This wasn't rebellion. It was revelation. What Traoré had ignited wasn't outrage, it was recognition. A quiet acknowledgement, spreading like wildfire. We've all known. We just didn't say it. At the University of Ibadan in Nigeria, students crowded lecture halls. Not for exams, but to debate the speech. Professors canceled classes to host impromptu forums. The topic wasn't just Traoré. It was sovereignty. "Why are our contracts hidden?" one student shouted. "Why do we call it aid when it leaves us poorer in Kigali?" Rwanda's youth minister tweeted, "What if we measured progress by ownership, not dependency?" It went viral in minutes. But the tremors didn't stop at the grassroots. They reached the top. Across Africa's capital cities, leaders who had sat quietly at that summit were now facing their people. And the questions came hard. Who signed those mining deals? Who approved those bases? What did we trade for that loan? For some, it was a reckoning. For others, it was opportunity. In Tanzania, a minister declared, on live television, "We welcome all partners, but the days of silent contracts are over." In Ghana, Parliament passed a resolution requiring all future foreign agreements be made public and debated before ratification. But perhaps the most stunning shift came from where no one expected. South Africa, long considered a diplomatic bridge between the West and the continent, released a formal statement: Africa must not be dictated to. The era of conditional partnerships is ending. We welcome collaboration, not coercion. Back in Washington, alarms were ringing. Langley returned to his command post in Stuttgart and found an inbox full of red flag cables. His mission had failed. Worse, it had detonated a movement. The White House demanded explanations. Why didn't you stop him? But they missed the point. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about everyone who had heard him. It wasn't one leader standing up. It was a continent standing tall. From Cairo to Cape Town, Accra to Addis Ababa. Something long dormant was waking up. The Traoré effect wasn't just political, it was psychological. A generation that had been taught to stay grateful was learning to demand more and are calm. And across Africa, one question now echoed, louder than any applause. If he could say it, why can't we? The world had been watching. But now, it was responding. In Washington, a flurry of emergency meetings was called behind closed doors. Langley's operation, meant to corner a minor African leader, had exploded into a global diplomatic wildfire. The Secretary of Defense looked across the room. Eyes narrowed. How the hell did this happen? No one answered. Because no one had predicted it. In Brussels, analysts scrambled to rewrite policy briefs. European leaders, once confident in quiet arrangements, now found themselves facing public scrutiny. Media outlets began asking questions long buried beneath foreign aid headlines. In Moscow and Beijing, it was a different mood entirely. There were no briefings, just quiet nods and revised strategies. For decades, Africa had been treated like a resource raw material in a global machine. But now, that machine was grinding, cracking, and shifting direction. And it all traced back to a young captain who hadn't shouted, hadn't threatened, he had simply spoken the truth, and let silence carry the rest. But what no one realized, at least not yet, was that Traoré hadn't just exposed secrets. He had exposed a system. And systems don't crumble all at once. They unravel thread by thread. In the weeks that followed, investigations were launched not in Burkina Faso, but in Europe and North America. Whistleblowers stepped forward. Former consultants admitted to loopholes and backdoor contracts. Leaked memos revealed how resource-rich nations were offered pennies on the dollar and told to smile for the camera. And back in Africa, something remarkable happened. People stopped whispering in dusty village cafes and capital city courtyards. The conversation had shifted from survival to sovereignty, from compliance to questions, from fear to clarity. And everywhere that same line echoed. We are not asking for permission to be sovereign. We already are. It was spray painted on university walls in Uganda, printed on t-shirts in Zambia, chanted in youth rallies in Cameroon. In Liberia, a former president went on national television and said, "This isn't a moment, this is a mirror." And every African leader better take a long, honest look. But the most powerful symbol came not from government, but from the people. In the heart of Ouagadougou, a statue appeared almost overnight. Bronze, life-sized. A man standing behind a microphone, not with a clenched fist, but with an open hand and steady eyes. At the base, 4 words. 5 minutes of silence. The meaning wasn't lost on anyone. It wasn't about a speech. It was about restraint, preparation, courage. The kind of courage that doesn't need to yell to be heard. General Langley returned to Stuttgart, a decorated officer, but one whose report would become a case study in failure. Not of intelligence, but of imagination. He had walked into that summit, believing power came from pressure. Traoré reminded the world, real power comes from purpose. And Africa had just remembered its own. Long after the applause faded, after the summit ended, and the headlines rolled in, one truth became impossible to ignore. This wasn't just a confrontation. It was a fault line cracking open beneath a global system that had assumed Africa would always stay quiet. And now, the ground was shifting. In the think tanks of Washington, analysts pored over Traoré's speech like it was a decoded signal. They weren't just asking what he said, but how he knew what to say, when to say it, and why it landed like thunder. One strategist whispered, during a late-night briefing, "We weren't outgunned. We were outprepared." Because that's what shook them the most. Traoré hadn't just challenged the system. He had understood it better than they did. The timing of his silence, the choreography of his evidence, the rhythm of his words. It was surgical. Every piece of data, every document, every word on that screen had been designed not to shock, but to awaken. And it had. Across the continent, African leaders began revisiting old contracts. Economists ran fresh audits. Activists demanded full transparency. And students, millions of them, started studying, not just politics, but power, because now they had seen it used correctly. And that may have been the most dangerous part of all. See, the system hadn't feared rebellion. It had feared example. And Traoré had become exactly that. A living, breathing example that, yes, one man can stand against the world's most powerful machinery and not just survive, but shift the weight of history. But here's the part most people missed. Traoré didn't improvise. He didn't stumble into that moment. He trained for it. He had watched leaders fall for decades, crushed by scandal, silenced by threats, buried by fear. And in every downfall, he studied why they lost, why they flinched, why they hesitated just long enough to be erased. And so, he built something different. He didn't just gather intelligence, he gathered momentum. He didn't just speak truth, he weaponized it. And when he stepped into that room in Accra, he didn't walk in to plead. He walked in to declare that Africa's silence was over, that its dignity was non-negotiable, that the world would no longer define the continent's worth by what could be taken, but by what could no longer be stolen. And so now, the question facing every capital from Paris to Pretoria, from Washington to Windhoek, isn't whether Traoré's message landed. It's what happens next. Because systems don't break all at once. They bend, they buckle, and one day, they snap. The day Ibrahim Traoré spoke, that was a snap. A break in the old script, and the beginning of one Africa would finally write for itself.